There's a moment in Starfleet Academy Episode 3 where the show finally stops flailing and commits to a Star Trek solution. Not a command override, not a lockdown, not even an adult stepping in to shut everything down, a plant. And that alone already separates it from Episodes 1 and 2, where conflict repeatedly ended with institutional intervention before consequences had really time to land. For the first time, the solution comes from restraint instead of authority. And then, almost immediately, the episode rushes past the discomfort that would have made that solution feel earned. Because Episode 3 gets the lesson right, it just solves it way too fast. What's up, my know-it-alls? Okay, today we are talking about Star Trek, Starfleet Academy, Season 1, Episode 3, Vitus Reflux. Vitus Reflux, Vitus Reflux, whatever you want to call it. This is the first episode where the show clearly understands what kind of Star Trek it wants to be. It also is the episode that reveals how the show prefers to teach its lessons, and why that choice matters more than whether the lesson itself is correct. Episode 3 centers on an escalating rivalry between Starfleet Academy cadets and students from the Starfleet War College. After a humiliating prank, War College cadets teleport Academy students out of the showers and into public view, half-dressed. Tensions spill into a competitive war game exercise called Callica. The Academy team, led by Durem collapses under pressure and loses badly. Infighting intensifies, especially between Durem and Genesis Live, while Caleb Mir remains emotionally distant, distracted by a growing connection with Terima Sadal, now at the War College. The War College doesn't just win. They needle, they posture, they humiliate. Chancellor Nala Ake discourages retaliation, insisting on restraint. Eventually, the Academy cadets unite around a single counter-move, infiltrating the War College dorm and releasing Vitus Reflux, a protected alien plant whose rapid growth forces the War College students out and ends the conflict without violence. That's what happens. Now, let's get a little deeper into that, shall we? The core idea of Vitus Reflux is deeply Star Trek. The conflict isn't resolved through domination. It isn't resolved through moral shaming. It isn't even resolved through superior firepower. It's resolved through leverage, restraint, and ultimately a respect for life. Now, that's a pattern Star Trek has returned to for decades, reframing conflict so escalation collapses under its own weight. Episode 3 finally understands that. The cadets don't defeat the War College, they corner them, ethically. And that part works. Where the episode stumbles is not what it teaches, but when it allows the lesson to land. This is episodic television. Compression is unavoidable, but compression is not the same thing as inevitability. It's a choice about what you let linger. Genesis loses leadership, but the fallout resolves almost immediately. Durem's arrogance costs the team, but accountability arrives within the same episode. The Academy's public failure never meaningfully alters their standing long enough to force any kind of adaptation. The humiliation motivates the plot, but it doesn't reshape the characters. Instead of letting the cadets live with failure, really live with it, the narrative pivots quickly to orchestration. Chancellor Ake isn't wrong. She's early. Rather than allowing friction to challenge her philosophy, the story arranges circumstances so she's validated almost immediately. Meaning arrives through authority before consequence finishes its work. Classic Trek would let conflict teach first and explanation would arrive later. Here, explanation leads. Now, I want to be very explicit, transparent, if you will, about my bias, because I think that matters. Part of my resistance here is most definitely taste. I was onboarded into Star Trek through implication. Stories that trusted the audience to sit in tension before anyone really explained what it meant. And I think that shapes how I respond. But this critique isn't nostalgia masquerading as principle. From a craft standpoint, resolving character fractures, I think, before they create lasting cost, regardless of audience, age, or format, That's not about intelligence. That's about patience. And patience is a storytelling choice, not an accessibility requirement. Here's why episode 3 still represents real progress. For the first time, the show's values, solution, and character agency, those things align. Episode 1 and 2 talked about Starfleet ideals while resolving conflict through containment and command. Episode 3 finally lets the cadets solve the problem themselves and do it in a really Star Trek way. I think that structural shift, that's meaningful. This isn't intent, it's compression. If future episodes allow failure to linger, if they trust friction to do more of the teaching, then this framework can actually support something durable. Like previous iterations of the series. Vitus Reflux isn't shallow, it's premature. The solution's right, the philosophy is Trek native. The episode just doesn't wait long enough for the lesson to hurt. And I think until the show learns to sit with that discomfort, it's going to keep arriving at the right answers before the questions have really fully done their job. So there you go. Now you know. And if knowing's half the battle, you're halfway to being know-it-all yourself. What is the know-it-all index for the 3rd episode of Starfleet Academy? I feel like when you look at this overall and you evaluate what it is and what it's doing, there are some shortcomings, and we'll definitely talk about those tomorrow night on Nerd Fights. And I know that Lore has some thoughts, and I know Salty has some thoughts. Overall, though, I like this. I feel like this knows where it's going. I just think it needs to allow itself to... There's a much more Star Trek version of this whole thing in there somewhere. But ultimately, I enjoyed this episode. I thought it did a good job being what it is. I think it falls into the YA traps of kind of over-sexualizing college-level people and whatnot in a way that can feel uncomfortable, but at the same time are still very much part of the genre. I had a conversation with a friend of mine, and one of the things he pointed out was, if you were to remove those elements in order to put in a lot more versions of this that could have been a lot more Trekky versions, if you will, it would stop being what it is. By that I mean, this is a YA college sort of drama. It's Dawson's Creek in space. We jokingly say, Star Trek 90210, but I think that that's probably an accurate analogy, but it's not necessarily a bad one. As long as it kind of remembers what its own thesis is, you have a chance of seeing something really, really great stand out. You don't need college classes like Good Will Hunting or professors pontificating over what we used to do back in our day and whatnot and flaw. You don't need that. I think what you need just are the characters, being grounded, having a place to live and stand, and ultimately plant your flag there. This gave me that. I just want to see more of it. There are little things I would tweak, but overall, I had a good time with this episode. Hopefully you will too. So what's that score? I'm going to give this an 8 out of 10. Let me know below what you think. Comment. I'd love to hear and discuss whether you agree with me, whether you don't, whether you think I'm full of crap, or you think, hey, whatever, this guy finally gets it, whatever. I would absolutely love to hear your take on Star Trek Strange New Worlds. I would absolutely love to hear your take on Starfleet Academy, and ultimately what you thought of this most recent episode. All right, guys, I'll see you again next week. Never forget, everyone loves a know-it-all. Bye, guys.